Hi, I'm Marc.
And I'm Chris Corcoran, and you're listening to Tech Sales is for Hustlers. Tech Sales for Hustlers is a podcast where we catch up with memoryBlue alums and reminisce about their start in high-tech sales with us.
Let's go get some, Corcoran.
Gagne, you know I'm ready.
Kelsie Edmonds in the house.
The pride of Danville, Virginia.
Danville, Virginia.
We're going to talk about that a little bit.
Yes,
I love when you talk to Kelsie, I think she comes across as very articulate and very intelligent, and then she just still slide in that Danville accent now and then. Chris used to try and do it, but he stopped doing it. His Roanoke thing. Danville's much more prestigious than Roanoke. Most places are. But you slide it in, and I like it. So maybe we'll get a taste of it on the podcast. So when your friends and family listen, they'll hear Danville.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sitting in Texas right now, so I can tell you, just being around more of the Southern accents, you're probably going to hear it come out even more just for that reason.
Oh, yes, that's right. You're in Texas. Yeah. All right. You kind of like a Danville, Austin accent.
Yep. Looking forward to it.
All right. Well, thanks for joining us. We know you're very busy.
Of course. Happy to be here.
Arguably one of the busiest people in the company. Certainly the most traveled. But we'll get into that too.
I won't argue with that at all.
The biggest wingspan.
That's true.
Like a Boeing 787. Like, what's the biggest plane? You can tell I've been flying around a lot recently.
Right. The one with the screws on it, though, not the ones where they shipped it without the screws in it. So
no doors flying off.
No doors flying off. All right. Kelsie, here's what we want to do. Chris and I know you, but we're going to learn more about you in the podcast. The people listening, some of your colleagues and friends will be listening, but there's going to be a whole fleet of people who are thinking about working here, who work here now, or who used to work here, who are going to be interested in your story, I think. So allow them, and Chris and I get to know you a little bit more. Tell us a little bit about yourself, where you're from, Danville, but growing up, what it was like, that whole deal, and what you thought you wanted to be. We'll walk you through it.
Sure. So Danville, Virginia, born and raised. It's a smaller town for those of you who don't know, very southern, very small. And I, growing up, thought my only options were being a nurse or a teacher. So that's always kind of what I had my sights set on. And so had a younger brother growing up. I was always the oldest child of two children. So the spearhead, of the family, basically, moving forward, always taking charge, being the leader in terms of whatever my brother and I were getting into, whether it was us being, 2 miles deep into the woods, playing in the creek. Really cool childhood of being out in, the woods the entire time, exploring, building, very naturally curious child growing up. And so that was a little
What's the age difference between you and your brother?
My brother's 2 years younger than I am.
Okay. Got it. All right. Okay.
Yeah. So growing up, it was the two of us. And as I got a little bit older, started looking at different colleges, came across.
Hold on. Yeah. Tell me about the school you went to.
So like high school?
Yeah. Yes.
Chatham, Virginia. So Chatham High School. This was even further out into the country. So it was about like a 20, 30-minute drive for me to get to high school. I will say it was basically, outside of our high school, we had a parking lot with a Food Lion in it and a Hardee's, and that was pretty much it. And so there's about 150 in my graduating class. I went there for, the 4 years. One of the really cool opportunities that I had, actually my last 2 years of high school, I could go to a governor's school, which I think some people know somewhat what governor's school are, but this one's a little different. I actually, my junior, senior year, was taking college level, community college classes for the first half of my day. So I'd start my day at 7:45, and we would drive an additional 45 minutes on a bus. And so I had to be at school at like 5:30 in the morning. We'd drive 45 minutes out to this really cool, it was like an Institute for Science and Technology. And I was there for the first half of the day, taking classes like physics, anatomy and physiology, English, statistics, different things like that. And so after that, I come back, do normal classes back at the high school for the second half of the day. And then after school, it was always dance for me.
There you go. All right. So I appreciate that. And I remember you told me about that once. So I wanted to make sure we highlighted your, even in high school, you're doing some pretty different things that require more commitment than the average person. What do you think you wanted to do? So growing up in Danville, going to high school, what do you think you were going to do when you grew up? So you kind of thought, well, I don't know if you thought nurse or being a teacher was the only option. Those are two obviously great professions, but did you think that's what you're going to do? Was it something else? This is good before you go into college, which we'll get to in a second.
So I think the coolest memory for me looking back, it's like when you ask a little girl what they want to be, they're like, oh, a rock star, a ballerina, or a nurse or teacher, using their mom or someone does. For me, it was actually, I didn't have anything specific in mind, but what I did have in mind was being this like badass woman in a pink suit in a corner office. Like that was something that I was actually thinking of as a child. And I know where it comes from. My mom was huge into the Lifetime and Hallmark movies. You know how a lot of the beginning of those start with like that strong female lead who might work in like a PR firm or be an attorney in some way, shape, or form, or even in a sales profession. Like those were the coolest women on earth to me, even as a child. And so I think that was just naturally what I wanted to be. Now, me being a little more realistic, I guess, and looking at things, I was like, oh, teacher or nurse, if I'm being in Danville, that's what people go and do. You either get into healthcare because everyone tells you that's where the money is, that's where you want to be, or
Yeah.
you're a teacher, because those were the women that I saw in my life and the things that they did.
Yeah. Yeah. So fascinating.
Mark, so it sounds to me like she wanted to be a professional boss lady.
Pretty much.
I've seen her in the corner offices. I haven't seen you in a pink suit. Do you have a pink suit?
I have the pants, but I don't have the top right now.
Okay.
That is something that it's sitting. I need to add it to like one of my carts somewhere and get it ordered. Because I have part one of that equation, but I don't have the second part yet.
We'll do another one of these podcasts at some point, and that one you'll have to have a pink suit from a corner office. That's not going to be too difficult for you to achieve, I don't think.
You've got it.
All right, excellent. All right, so professional boss lady. Where'd you go to college? What'd you major in?
Yeah, so James Madison University, go Dukes, JMU. Absolutely loved it there. So when I came in, not a shocker here, I came in as a nurse. So I was looking at teaching. But sorry to all my teachers out there. There was just this thought that I'm like, teachers don't make enough money. And I like making money. I want nice things in my life. Like I want to be able to go and explore and have freedom to do the things that I want to do. So I get in and I'm like, all right, nursing is what it's going to be. Well, I immediately am like, why did I choose this? Like, I am not into blood and gore and all of that. Like, not a good fit for me. So instantly I started looking around and I'm like, what can I do that's going to be a little bit more fitting to what I think I want to do? So within my first year of being at JMU, I was introduced to speech therapy, where it was a mix of the two worlds for me. So teaching, I still get to coach and develop and work with usually younger children in that like 3 to 5 age or older adults to help them, rehabilitate in different ways or help them learn new skills. But it also had the really cool parts of the healthcare side of things. I loved anatomy and I loved physiology, and just the intricacies of that was really cool to me at the time. And so it was like a blend of the two things that I liked. So within my sophomore year, I switched my major, and that was where I continued on for the rest of my, college journey.
Got it. What did you do when you got out? What did you decide you wanted to do, and what did you walk us through that?
So kind of taking a step back to senior year, I started doing some of the more clinical aspects of the role and was having to apply to grad school. There was just this heavy feeling sitting with me on like, is this really what I want to do? Something just wasn't feeling right. And I'm someone, me, I listen really heavily to my intuition on a lot of things in my gut. And so I was just like, I just don't know. But I'm also not a quitter. And so the part of me was like, you know what? You're going to make this work. You're going to try and go and do this. And I'm like, watch me go do it. Well, when I get back to Danville, I applied to work at a nonprofit speech therapy office. We were serving some of the communities in Danville that didn't quite have access to healthcare. And within that job, it just started to hit me more and more. Like, I don't know if this is really what I want to do. One of the probably not as shocking things, like I started taking on a lot of office management responsibilities, some of the marketing responsibilities of how do we reach out to more doctors? How do we get more involvement, more patients, get our name out there? And so I'm sitting there, and my wonderful executive director, her husband was in the business world. He was a CPA, and he would come in every once in a while. And one day he just looked at me, he's like, Kelsie, I know this isn't what you want to do. He's like, you're great. I have a feeling of something that I think you would do really well in, but I want you to tell me first, where do you think you belong? And that right there, like that hit me. I wasn't expecting it. Like, obviously I'd had those feelings that had been building, and for someone to just call it out right then and there, I was like, ooh, okay. And I
How'd
said,
how'd that make you feel?
I mean, I felt seen, I felt heard, and it was exciting to me because I think it was that I knew deep down that the minute when something gets called out in my life, I know I'm going to have to run 100 miles in that direction, 100 miles an hour in that direction. Otherwise, that feeling of just uncomfortable is going to keep growing and growing and growing until I'm miserable. And so it was just an amazing thing. Cause I'm like, oh, okay, well, the journey's about to take a direction. I'm about to start going a new path, but like, I don't even know where to start, where to begin, like what it is. And so my answer to him was, I want to get in the business world. And
In real time.
in real time. And I said, I think I want it to be sales.
Really?
Yeah. I'd had a few friends from JMU that had gotten into the sales world, in the tech world specifically, and especially in the Tyson's Corner, Northern Virginia area. And so I think for me, like that is something that I was aware of, especially seeing people who had different majors. You know, me, I'm sitting here thinking speech therapy, oh my God, that's the only thing I can do for the rest of my life. And I don't even like it that much. Like I'm screwed. It's my major. You know, I think a lot of college kids go through that moment of like, oh my gosh, like what do I do here? But like they realize how easy it can be to break into something like sales, especially at memoryBlue, when it comes to just having the right like characteristics as a person, being driven, ambitious, outgoing, like competitive, curious, all of those. Like I knew that I had some of those core skills. And so I think I even took a couple tests, maybe a few weeks or months before that. I'm like, what would I be good at? And it was one of the things like that or politician. And I'm like, I'm not that involved in politics. Like I won't be going that direction. So it's kind of how I ended up at memoryBlue's front door.
All right. So what inspired the executive director of that organization to ask you that, you think?
Yeah, it was her husband. And so I asked myself that. He was at the golf course with my dad and my brother and my whole family growing up. And so I think he had just started to know me well enough. Like he was in pretty often. And I think they saw just like how just was kind of dragging through the day a little bit. I wasn't as happy, wasn't as bright. Cause like, if you know me, I'm walking around bright, happy, bubbly throughout the day.
Engaging.
Like when exactly. Yep. And so, I mean, I think it's very noticeable when those characteristics start to fall off of me. And I really think that's what he was in tune with.
How long did it take from when he had that conversation to when you ended up working for us?
So I had that conversation on a Monday.
And with us, excuse me.
So I had that conversation on a Friday. And by Friday of the following week, I was already in an interview with memoryBlue. And I was still living in Danville at the time, so 4 hours away from memoryBlue. I immediately applied over the weekend. I had Tom Beck reach out on.
Ding.
Yeah, Tom Beck was awesome, actually. I really enjoyed having him as a recruiter. He reached out on, I think, like Monday or Tuesday. And by Friday, I had my first interview. And that's where I got started. So, and I was moved up, actually. So throughout the whole interview process, from the time that this idea was brought up my executive director to being actually inside of memoryBlue, it was less than a month. And that included me moving. I want to say it was like 3 weeks.
Wow. Yeah. A woman of action, Chris.
Yes.
Indeed.
So I'm looking at Danville here on the map, man. You just don't realize how big of a state Virginia is. Danville's down on the border, boy.
Yeah. I mean, it takes us like 5-10 minutes to drive into North Carolina.
Yeah. Okay. All right, 4.5 hours. Some say 5, depending upon the mood. Did you know what you're getting yourself into when you came to memoryBlue? Like, do you have friends from JMU that work here, or was it more like word of mouth?
No, to be honest, you guys were at the top of. First thing I went to was Indeed, and memoryBlue was one of the companies right at the top of Indeed. And so I was like, you know what, I'm going to apply. And then I did it. I had friends who had worked for a couple of other companies in the area, so like I was familiar with some, and I thought about applying to those, but one thing about me, like I love to chart my own path and my own journey. One of the reasons I actually chose JMU was because I didn't have that many friends going there, and I really liked the school to begin with. And so memoryBlue was that for me. Like I could have gone, and like my boyfriend at the time was working at a company, didn't want to go there. I had a couple of other friends. Like this was my journey to chart, and like I wanted to do it my way. And memoryBlue, just on top of that, caught my attention immediately once I got through the doors.
Tom Beck had to help.
Oh my gosh, yeah, he was great.
Yeah, Tom. All right. So what were just tell us about the earliest days, the early days at memoryBlue. So you got up here, get into sales, go to memoryBlue.
Well, before you get into that, so you're living in Danville, and then did you just find roommates? Like, how did you end up relocating?
I swear this is where like everything aligned perfectly. So my birthday had been a couple months prior in October, and I had a friend from college who was driving up, and it was like the weekend of my birthday. And she's like, hey, I'm driving through Danville back from North Carolina. Like, do you want to catch up and have a drink? And I was like, yeah, totally. I'll have a drink. And so her name was Emma. Emma and I went and had drinks. She's like, so, I'm from Richmond, Virginia, but my parents, I just inherited a house in Northern Virginia from my uncle. It's in Arlington. She's like, I'm moving into it. And I was like, well, that's interesting. A whole house by yourself? And she was like, yeah. And I'm like, I mean, my boyfriend at the time lived up there. I had a lot of friends up there. I'm like, there are cool jobs up there. I was like, that would be interesting if I were to be able to move up there. And so I messaged her immediately as soon as everything started clicking. And I'm like, hey, let's make it happen. Like, I'd love to move in. She's like, oh my gosh, I'd love to have you. Like, let's do it. So that's how I was able to, she had an extra room and I was up there in no time.
Wow.
Keep going, Chris.
So then just talk us through kind of, you're starting. Did you start during COVID? When did you start? Was it during COVID? Was it remote? The early days?
Definitely. So that was the interesting part. So I started February 17th. As we all know,
wow.
We went home virtual on March 16th, I believe. So like a month. And I honestly think it's worse than the people who started during COVID. And the reason for that is I got a taste of the good life, having everyone around me, having people that I could learn from, like being able to turn around immediately and like say something, or if a prospect was just totally, going in on me, I could at least hang up the phone and look at the person to my right and be like, I just got shredded just now on the phone. Have someone to laugh about it. Versus COVID, I'm sitting home and I'm looking at the dog that were watching my roommate not to my left, being like, I just got shredded. He's just looking back at me. He doesn't have anything to say. So my very first day, I think, is one of my favorite stories. I think COVID was an interesting time. I know it's a little bit afterwards here. I'm already in the managing director role, so I'm safe. I feel like, at least to a degree. My very first work from home day, I woke up at 8 a.m. so excited to be working from home, made myself a Bloody Mary to start the blitz off. Yes, I was just so excited. And like, I was on like a big cake of Bloody Marys at the time, but like I was going to get my day started right. Like it was just a really cool time. I will say that mentality of working from home changed very fast. And one of the things that I actually did after that, I learned I hated working from home so much. So one of the cool things is I came in the office every single day during COVID. Like obviously we didn't have people in there, so the whole office was empty. I remember there's me, one other guy, Evan Ferguson at the time, who was coming in every day. And then there was Nina, Chris, and then Marc. I think you would come in occasionally too, but I just remember like Nina and Chris being the two that I saw throughout that time.
Yep. Kelsie, that tracks. Some things never change with Marc and his.
That's not true. So hold on. Keep going. Ignore it. Terrible joke.
Yeah, I mean, so I was coming in the office every single day. Like I'm a person where, and I think this is what makes me a little different than some salespeople. Like we try not to be dictated by our environment. But that is just something that actually is a little bit harder for me. Like, and I do think it's what's made me really good in this role for a lot of reasons. Like we can talk about that a little bit later, like the culture and the emphasis that I have on that. But for me, environment is everything. And so I wanted to get in the right mindset when I started my day, when I was dialing, hitting the phones, being an SDR. So I was in every single day. Outside of that, like I will say, like I had this amazing client that I loved that first month before I went remote with the rest of the office. And so
who was that?
So at the time they were Tapped In. They're now known as Foresight.
Yes.
Sad thing is they were a workspace technology. As you know, workspaces started clearing out. People weren't in. Like many companies at the time, they were trying to play it safe, keep a little cash. And so they canceled their agreement with us. And so I got moved on to a different client.
Warren Buffett fired us, Chris.
Get in line.
We gave them one of our best in a Berkshire Hathaway company. Said, so sorry, we're out. Crazy. So Scars, keep going. So they ended, and I was like, to an SDR, when you're client in, sometimes it can feel like the most devastating thing in the world, especially when you love your POC. I was booked out for 14 meetings the next month. I was so insanely happy, loving life with this client. I mean, this was another like just boss of a woman. I absolutely loved her. And so it was great to work for her, and to knowing that was coming to an end was really sad for me. But
like we always do, we had a plan. And so Nick Perry, my DM at the time, had lined up a new campaign for me. It was a data governance campaign. I will say I did not get off to as hot a start on that one as what I did on my previous campaign. And it was a struggle, especially during COVID. But I will say I was in the office every single day, and I am someone who I'm going to make it work. And so I was that SDR that was making 200 dials a day, even if it meant I was getting in 2 conversations. Like, I didn't care what it was going to take to get me in a conversation for that day. I was breaking down my calls every single day before I left the office. I was eating lunch at my desk because I wanted to be so laser focused in on the day. Like, I had a sales podcast going while I'm list building and eating my lunch. Like, I was going to do whatever I needed to do to make it happen. I will say it was a really tough campaign for me at the time, especially during COVID. I think we can all, now that we're on the other side of it, look back and say, like, we definitely faced a whole lot of objections, lower connection rates, everything during COVID. And we had to learn to adapt too.
People were like, yeah, why are you calling me right now? I don't even have a job tomorrow. My industry's laying off folks. Who knows what's going to happen? It was a time of great uncertainty, but it's funny. I felt like people were really dialing in, no pun intended. People were dialing in and they were locking in during those times, right?
I'd say that's one of my favorite things about this company, because I think we've experienced it not only during COVID, but I think here recently with some of the economic things that are happening, like when things get a little bit more tough, like we kind of had a mini round 2 of that with companies trying to play it a little more safe. What did we do? I watched every single delivery manager, managing director, and SDR double down on the work that they were doing, getting more strategic, putting more in during their day. And I just think it's one of the really cool things that, like, we collectively do as a company when these times happen.
Yeah, I mean, thank you for saying that. I mean, because I agree, it's nice to hear it. That's the right way to do it. So when you were doing this, what were you good at as an SDR? Like, what did you develop? What skill? What was your kind of calling card, superpower, if you will?
That's a great question.
Signature Kelsie Edmonds move.
Yeah, I mean, like, there were so many things that I felt like I had to develop in changing campaigns. One thing that I do really well, and I even do it now, it's like I wanted to reset. I wanted to get back to the basics on what it is that I was doing. And so for me, I come back to the foundation when things get tough. And so that's exactly what I did. I actually went through and reviewed some of my academy notes and started getting back to, like, how can I create an opening statement that's going to be a little bit more in line with what, we're taught? How can I work on building out a few more questions that are going to drive a little bit more value, or maybe like their pain questions, just get the prospect to open up. And so I think my biggest skill really was the piece of reflection and getting back to those foundational aspects. In terms of being on the phones, like, I'm not going to say I was the strongest SDR ever by any means. Like, there were a lot of skills that I felt like I really developed more in my DM tenure than I did my SDR tenure.
Get to that.
The fundamentals.
Exactly. But so I guess one piece of that too, like, I went on a performance plan as an SDR. Like, I've never been
let's
one.
talk about that.
Yeah. So I was put on a performance plan. I will say my initial reaction probably is similar to a lot of other SDRs when they first get put on one. Like, I'm a human. I know these things. Like, it is a tough feeling to be in that room being placed on a performance plan. Like, you're sitting there thinking, is my job at stake? Like, you're also like questioning your own ability to do things. Like, do I suck at everything that I do? Like, what is happening? Like, it did sort of feel like the end of the world there in that moment. I can tell you, as someone who has been on one, who has rolled them out, who has seen the back end of it, it truly isn't. And I can get a little bit into that. But for me, I will say I left that meeting. I may have cried, shed a couple tears here and there. But knowing who I was, immediately was like, all right, let's jump into action. And so I talked to my delivery manager at the time. And one of the other things I did, I immediately put time on, there were a couple other DMs that I really respected, and was close with, for the most part, in the office. So Ron Cook, he's actually the managing director of public sector, was something I was really close with. I put time on Ron's calendar. I'm like, Ron, here's what just happened. I need some help, some direction. Like, I want to get off of this, like, ASAP. How do I do it? And I met with Max Farr at the time also. He was a delivery manager, maybe even moving towards managing director, I believe, of our PPM side of the business. And so same thing with him. I'm like, here's what happened. I want to get off of this. Help me do it. So I actually sat down with the two of them, really started creating a game plan. Ron was absolutely amazing. He's one of my mentors and has been in a lot of ways throughout my journey and time at memoryBlue. But they were hosting like whiteboarding sessions with me, helping me get deeper into my calls. It was just a really cool experience to watch the people around me kind of help lift me up as I was working so hard to drive the success for myself. Like the resources exist within memoryBlue. And that's, I think, one thing where I love seeing SDRs when they recognize that and they start to take advantage of it. It's a really cool thing to watch because like the resources truly are endless, whether it's people, whether it's academy, whether it's the leaders that exist within, the company in your office.
Can you talk to me about why you were listening to a sales podcast? Because you're another one of these folks, high achieving people. You've got a thirst for knowledge. Can you kind of share why that philosophy is important when you're a newbie, just an SDR in general, but certainly a newbie SDR? Like you talk about revisiting your notes, listen to a sales podcast. You mentioned Academy. Like, let's talk to us about that.
Yeah. So one funny thing is like, I actually didn't love being in school, didn't like college, didn't like school. Like that right there was just, I am so much more of a hands-on person, but I want to be able to do while also learning. So when it comes to the learning aspect of it, I mean, I don't know, like memoryBlue, the academy really set me up with the right foundations. But my thing, and this is the mentality that I've had ever since I was a child, like I want to be the best. Like that is something that's just very innate within me. I think we find that within a lot of salespeople too. Like, and to be the best, like there's this one story that my dad told me when I was growing up that I think never really left it. He was like, look, you might be the best dancer in Chatham High School, let's say, but it doesn't mean you're the best dancer in the county. Might not mean you're the best dancer in the state, the nation. There's always going to be someone that's putting in just a little bit more hard work than you are. And that just hit me hard, being like, you really have to stay humble in a lot of ways and continue to drive yourself and work hard in order to be the best. And so for me, it was always like, if I want to be the best, like I do have to continue to level up. And I enjoy the process of leveling up too. It's a very fulfilling feeling for me to feel like I'm showing up as a new and better person every single day. And those podcasts, it was the 1 minute, like 2 minute sales podcasts, like kind of updates where I could get them in like really quick and a couple different things. Yeah. And so I'm like, I can at least be ingesting some material in the background as I'm building out my lists and targets that I want to go after for the week. And I would write down notes. I might pause for a second and write down a couple things if I really liked what it said. But for me, it just, I don't know. It's really hard to describe because it's one of those, like, it's very innate.
And why is that important to a new SDR who's new in the space?
Yeah. I mean, great.
New in the role, new in sales.
Definitely. So, I mean, this is a tough job to get into. I think the way that I've described sales, there is no, you learn it, you do it, you're good at it. Like sales is an art. It's always changing. It's always growing. People can view it from different perspectives. And in order to do that, like you have to hone in on your own craft. And that's what you're doing. And so for me, like I wanted to create my own brand within myself, the way that I approach things. And so SDRs now, like I encourage you to, start ingesting material that's going to help you develop who you are as a salesperson. You are going to be learning. And I'm still, you guys, even, Marc and Chris, to this day, learn something, see something that, you want to implement in your own style. Like we never stop in this, profession. And so for me, it was like, I always learn, like, if you're going to run fast, especially in your 20s, your 30s, like you want to grow. This is the best time. You have the most energy, like get after it. And so it was kind of aligning with that for me of like, if I'm going to learn, like, let me soak as much as I can up in the beginning of my career. And it's only going to create that momentum, that energy for the rest of my career to move in the right direction.
Yes, I would heartily agree with that. Also, so you were learning from Academy. You were learning, you have got this innate ability to be driven, and your pops reminding you of that, and then spending your time now focusing on it. What about learning from other people? Are there any SDRs when you were here, when you were in the office, you're like, man, learning from your peers is big, right? We're a big work from the office company. You can work from your house and you've kind of earned that privilege, but even then we don't want you there too much. Who did you remember, just give a couple shout outs if you remember other SDRs who are like, man, these people are good. Like besides yourself, who was strong?
Yeah. See, this one's a tough one for me to answer. I'm definitely going to throw out some names, but like my hunger had me looking at who's the DM that I want to be. Like I want to pick out the next level and I want to pick their brains. Like for me, it was like, I had amazing SDRs around me, but it was the DM. So I will say some of the DMs at the time for me, like Simone Comer was absolutely amazing. I've mentioned Yep.
Yes. Swaggy P's wife.
Yep. Ron Cook, and Max Haar, as well as Stacy Shoemaker at the time. She was awesome. Like, we had some like really cool people in the delivery manager role that I wanted to learn from and be. And so those were the people that I was actually looking to and asking the most advice and paying attention to at the time.
All right. So let's talk about that. So you're looking at what you want to do next. Like, why did the DM role jump out at you? Because you're sitting there in the office doing your thing. You're seeing some SDRs get hired by clients, some SDRs go out and rising stars, but you seem to be really intently focused on DMs. So why do you think that was?
Yeah. So this is the thing where like it's always been very natural for me. I started picking up mentees. And I absolutely loved being a mentor within memoryBlue, working with the new hires that were coming in, like just being able to coach and share the knowledge that I learned is something that I'm really passionate about. And it's why I thought about being a teacher, way back when.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
And so that coaching and development part, I've just always enjoyed it. And it came natural to me. Now I will say it doesn't always come natural to a lot of delivery managers. I still had a lot to learn, but when I say it came natural, it felt comfortable to me that I could get in and do and learn and grow from the foundations that I had. And so I started picking up mentees, as well as when I mentioned I was struggling with my client, I was trying so many things and implementing so many new things. It gave me a lot to talk to the client about in terms of the strategies and different things we were trying and implementing every week. And it helped me get pretty strong in, my client calls on a weekly basis. And I enjoyed communicating with them and interacting. And so one of those things just started to naturally fall into place as I started getting more mentees under my belt. I started showing up stronger in my client calls. And so what I did was I walked into Kristen Wisdorf's office one day.
Yes.
Someone had mentioned the delivery manager role. And I looked at her and I was like, Kristen, I think I'm going to be a delivery manager. Like, what skills can I be working on right now as an SDR to help me prepare for a delivery manager role? Well, got a little intense and she turned it into an interview pretty much right then and there. Like I was the one getting peppered with questions.
Let's go. Kelsie, I have a question for you because I know I've seen you in action in Boston. I didn't get to work with you that much in Virginia, but I've seen you in action in Boston, in Seattle, a little bit in San Jose. And you have this passion to coach and develop people. There's no doubt about it. It's one of your ultimate strengths. And then, for a little bit, you thought maybe you're going to be a teacher and a speech therapist or speech pathologist as you're teaching, helping people. Where does that, why do you like coaching and developing people so much and teaching?
Yeah. I mean, for me, what I love is like some people look at, if you can do the role well, that's great. But if you can teach someone to do a role well, like I think in terms of being the best, like for me, that almost puts you a level above in being the best. Like if you can teach and you can push, like that's the next level for me. Is helping other people achieve the success that you've achieved. And it's very fulfilling for me to see that. And so I would say like I am the most fulfilled when I go and I teach someone and I'm able to show them, how to view something, how to approach something, they can go and successfully do that. I get so excited just seeing the outcomes of what I'm able to put in time in terms of my work and everything that I love. And part of it comes from I love psychology and knowing how brains work. And so that's a really exciting part of, I think, the sales world for me.
I mean, you've been with us for over 4 years and only 9 of those months, which is enough, you were in the SDR role. The rest of the time you've been coaching and developing people.
Exactly. And I love it.
What do you have anybody who stands out in your mind? Anybody, any SDRs who've been on your team that you're like, man, I remember that like in a great way, or not? I'm totally putting you on the spot, but I was just kind of curious. I know you've worked really closely with new MDs, new DMs. You got SDRs who've worked for you.
Yeah, I think one of my biggest, I'd say, wins, and this actually happened more as a mentor as I was just transitioning into the DM role. So one of my favorite people that I've ever worked with, sorry to everyone else who has worked underneath me that is listening to this podcast, but Jack Class.
Okay.
Who was an absolute killer on the phones. I loved this guy. He was my mentee. And I loved, it's really fun when you can get someone it's very moldable, a lot of talent that you can work with. And so for me, getting to work with him and just watching him level up every day was a really cool thing to witness. He ended up joining our PPM team, absolutely crushed it when that was a thing. And I really enjoyed having the opportunity to work with him.
That's amazing. That's great. That's such an impact on people's career and personal life, frankly. So, all right. So you got into the DM seat. And you were a DM for over 2 years, which is that's an amazing job. Talk to us about the transition from being an SDR who had figured it out, who's performing well, someone who wanted to be a DM. What did you have to learn? What skills did you have to develop to be a good DM? Because that is a tough job.
It is. And you guys are going to laugh at this, but like I pretty much got put on a coaching plan within my first few months of being a delivery manager. I would say first few, like about like 4 months into the role. I think for me, like I have ADHD. So like in terms of like prioritizing my day, it can be difficult sometimes to getting the action items and like staying organized. And I have to put a lot of supports in place for that. But that was one of the things I think I had to learn the most stepping into the delivery manager role, is making sure that I was staying on top of the most important items in the way that I needed to. And so that was hard for me, just because it's something that it's a little more difficult. But it's fine because I know that I can create the supports no matter ADHD or not. Like everyone needs the supports in their lives to help them be successful. Yep. We all have our weaknesses and things that hold us back. But as someone who's had to create supports throughout their entire life, I think it may be easier for me to create them, sometimes. So I'd say that was probably the biggest thing. The client side, of course, we've mentioned that I do a lot better, I think, on the coaching side. The client side took me a second to learn. I remember stepping in and being like, I got to figure out, like, I know how to talk to my one client that I have a relationship built with, but like, how do I start getting relationships built with some of these other clients and learning how to interact with them? Especially, you have some clients who are a little more tough, some clients who are a little bit, nicer on the easier side, care about you like personally. And it's just a range. And so for me, it was learning how to interact with all those different styles of people. It took me a minute. And so I reached out to Stacy at the time, Stacy Shoemaker, and I said, hey, can I shadow some of your client calls? Like, I'm trying to elevate my own skills. And so I started getting in and shadowing a lot of different calls, and over time started to get a lot stronger in that area.
What's more difficult as a DM, working with SDRs or working with clients?
I would say it varies. With all the DMs that I've worked with, I can tell you you're one or the other most of the time. I'll say I usually see people who lean more towards the SDR side of things, but like it's very, people usually have an easy answer for one or the other, but typically working with clients will be the harder side.
Working with clients. How did you handle, having people on your team who, we know weren't like you as an SDR that you had to motivate? Everyone thinks they're going to hire people kind of like themselves, and that's not how it works, no matter how hard you try, for better or for worse. Like, how did you work through that as a manager?
I think that's one of the hardest things for a lot of managers, is realizing your employees are never going to be you. You might get the one who you really resonate with every once in a while, and you can usually take those people pretty far. But for me, I definitely had it in the very beginning. But one of the things that, growing up, even as a child, I've been very naturally curious. Like my mom always said, I was a kid that was like touching everything everywhere on the shelves, like pulling things out, like trying to figure out how things worked. And so I think one of the things that did set me up for success early on as a manager was I would stay really curious whenever people would bring things up. If I didn't know how to handle something, just like being on a call, you don't know how to handle it, you get curious, you have to go in and find the answer. And so I try to dig down to as close as like a root cause is what I feel like I can get to when I don't understand people or I don't know the situation. And once I get there, I feel like it can usually make a pretty accurate, or I can have a pretty accurate response in that scenario. So my curiosity really did me well from the beginning.
And talk to me about, so we talked about the clients, we talked a little bit about SDRs. Let's talk about interviewing, right? I mean, the bottom line is you're only 4 years out of, you've been with this 4.5 years. You haven't been working for years and years and years and years. And you've interviewed tons of people, well over 100, maybe in the hundreds. You've hired hundreds of people. You've seen people get promoted. You've seen people get hired by clients. You've had performers manage people out of the company. You've had people quit on you. It happens to all of us. Let's talk about a little bit about the art of interviewing. And what's your general philosophy on interviewing and identifying people who you think will thrive in the role?
Definitely. So there's one main thing that I look for, and that is ownership. I am looking and listening out through their stories. Were they the person driving the action? Or was their environment fully determining what happened to them? Were your coaches and the players around you the reason that you got better? Or were you the person that was like, hey, I wanted to go hit the gym at 5 a.m. every single day so I could continue to build muscle mass and show up and be a better player on the field? Like, those are two very different things for me. So I want the person that's showing up to the gym at 5 a.m. working on themselves versus the person that's like, yeah, we made it to state, but like I had all my, friends around me and my coaches like really pushing me to do better. Not a bad thing, but like I want those drivers because that's what you have to be in sales. You have to be willing to go out there and find the prospects, get the meetings, like go after it. And so I want to see some of those stories. Now, I think with a lot of other people I align with, we want people who are naturally competitive, naturally curious, but ownership is my number one thing.
And talk to me a bit about how you win SDRs, right? So we haven't even gotten to what you're doing now, which I really want Chris to kind of set up how we would describe what you're doing for the company when we get there, which we're inching closer to that. But I do want to spend some time on this. You as a DM. How do you win clients? How do you win SDRs in recruiting battles when sometimes we may not be as well resourced as a software company, or might be like a business to consumer ish B2B or B2C closing role or something like that. Like meaning walk us through why you think an SDR should work here if they're considering working for us and they've got other offers on the table that they might think are more lucrative or more closing-esque.
Yeah. So first thing I do, I do like to talk about myself, and I'm 27 years old. I'm a managing director. I've worked in how many different offices now and done a lot within the company. And so that's something I like to just let them know from the very beginning. But I think, one of the things I like the most about memoryBlue, I mean, you have people who are, 1, 2, 3, 4 years out of being out of memoryBlue as an alumni, whether they got hired out by their client or they went through our Rising Stars program. And I mean, they're already sitting in director level roles. Like we have people who are sitting in VP roles. Like, your path to promotions and making more money is so much faster when you start your career in the sales, like the tech sales world, with memoryBlue. I see people that started at some of these other companies, especially larger ones, like they're sitting in an SDR role 4, 5, 6 years. Like we're seeing it, I think now more than ever, people who are sitting in the SDR role for at least 6 years. No one wants to be an SDR for 6 years. Like I can tell you, it's a hard job. It's not easy. Some people like it. Maybe, there are those, 2%ers out there that do want to stay in the role, but like most people who are getting into sales are extremely ambitious people who want to continue to move up and grow. And so memoryBlue, I mean, I've just witnessed it through a lot of my friends that have gotten hired out, alumni, people we brought back to be on this very, podcast of how well they set themselves up in their career and how fast they've been able to move up and the experiences that they've been given.
All right. Corcoran, I don't want to take all the airtime.
Kelsie, I want you to talk a little bit about the mentality of finding a way. And there's a story that I want you to share about Mexico and about how you really wanted to get there, but you didn't have the right documentation.
Of course. Happy to jump into that. So, as I mentioned, like sometimes a little ADHD here. I may have misplaced my passport at some point in time. And we had a company trip to Mexico planned, our annual TOPS trip from back in the day. And we are, I don't know, probably sitting 2 weeks out, a week and a half out from flying out to Mexico. And I go to open the drawer where my passport normally is, and it's not there. So for me, I'm like, oh no, this is not good. And there's no way this trip that I earned a spot on, I'm not about to make it out to Mexico in the sun, the water, the drinks, you name it. So what did I do? I put my prospecting skills to use. I was a delivery manager at the time. I started cold calling, leaving voicemails, and LinkedIn messaging people at the DC passport office saying that I needed an emergency passport. I had logged in. There were no times. Like, it's impossible to get a time at the DC passport office. Like, if anyone's ever tried, like, just don't do it. You're better off getting a flight to Connecticut and getting an appointment. I didn't want to do that. That was on the table. I thought about it for a good minute, but I wasn't quite there. So next thing I know, I get a call back from one of the guys there at the passport office, who's the director. He's like, hey, Kelsie, like, how soon can you be here? And I'm like, I'm at the front door right now. Like, it's like 7:30 in the morning, 8 a.m. Like, they had just opened. And he was like, oh, perfect. Well, guess what? It's your lucky day. Come on in. Like, I got your voicemail. I saw your message on LinkedIn. He's like, I respect it. Come on in. And I walked out of there same day with a passport.
The young woman from Danville, Corcoran, taking care of bringing the small town to the big city.
I thought there was some sort of stay over in Puerto Rico or something.
So that was on the table. I was looking at different flights to potentially going. Puerto Rico had openings that it was like I was this close to book or very close to booking a flight out to Puerto Rico. I didn't actually have to do it because of this guy responding to me that morning.
Wow. That's great. That's
Covering
great.
all your bases.
So I love the determination. And as the listeners, I'm sure, have picked up, your attitude is everything's always great, right? Danville was the best place to grow up. JMU was the best school ever. memoryBlue is amazing. SDR is the best job. Like that mentality is just such a gift. And always being able to kind of see the blue skies. Talk a little bit about how you think that's helped you in your career.
Oh my gosh. I mean, one, I've taken on some pretty big challenges over time. Like everyone's going to have their dip. You know, we talk about it early on. Marc does with a lot of our new hires here. And I've experienced quite a few of those things, but like, I don't know, again, it's one of those probably more innate things for me in terms of like, if I'm going to face a challenge, for me, there's no other option than to work through it. You're only going to feel worse. It's going to grow bigger. It's going to hit harder if you don't address what you're going through and you don't push yourself through it. And those are things that I've had to learn over time. And so pushing through it, it's never been any other option for me.
Very good. So walk the listeners through your career. So you're an SDR, you get promoted to a DM, and then from the DM, take it from there.
DM role. So I was in a delivery manager role for 2 years. I will say very similar to the SDR role. I started taking on mentees within the delivery manager role, started working with them. One thing that I did, I think was a little bit different than some of my other peers, is I loved Salesforce. I've always found data to be really, really cool. And so I just started getting in Salesforce and exploring and learning like different ways that I can see and track my SDR's progress, some of the struggles, what they're facing. And so started building out reports to where it was just something that I got really good at. And not while we've worked with our managers on it, I started building some really cool reports, and people were coming to me, delivery managers were left and right saying like, hey, I saw that really cool report. Like, can you walk me through it and show me how you use it? And I had this desk in the office where it kind of faced the whole aisle. I remember at one point in time sitting at that desk as a delivery manager, just watching delivery managers round the corner, coming to me, asking for different things, to where, I mean, throughout a day, like I was having request after request after request for either helping them look at an email, to a client, to Salesforce things. Like Salesforce was my in, and people starting to trust and learn from me and know that, oh, she's knowledgeable. Like there are things that we can learn from her. And next thing I know, like it's just a very natural thing for me to have these people who are coming left and right. And in some days, it felt like I was almost doing the MD job just with how much people were trusting me in that role. And so from there, we had our next Mexico trip. I happened to be in Mexico, and next thing I know, I get a Teams message. I just happened to check my phone from a Kristen Wisdorf at the time, and she was like, "Hey, Kelsie, do you have a second?" She actually called me while I was in Mexico, and we talked through the managing director role for Virginia. So I was sunburnt, red as a lobster. Probably the most embarrassing call for me to hop on camera on in my life, and that's when the managing director role started for me in Virginia.
In Virginia. And so how long did you serve in that role?
Virginia, I was in that role for about 5 months. Some of that time I just transitioned into Boston a little bit.
Okay. Gotcha. And then talk about, so you were an MD in Virginia, and then how did Boston come about?
Yeah. So, Boston, there had been an opening. I think one of the things in Virginia, I had started working with a team where they had a couple of things that they had been working on. And I had turned around a lot of production. And next thing we know, like the SDRs are booking more than they ever have. The culture is sitting, it's more energetic. People are happy to be coming in every day. Like there were a lot of really cool things that I was able to implement in my short time of like being in with the Virginia squad, Virginia 2 at the time. And so Kristen was like, look, we have this opportunity in Boston. We would love for you to step in and do some of the things that you've done here in the Virginia office. Like there's room for you to help increase that energy on the floor, bring that kind of like Kelsie special touch to the office. Like we would love to see production, as always, continue to increase on our different campaigns there. And so it was very quick for me. I love adventure. I love traveling. And so it's like, send me to Boston. I'd never been to Boston either. fun fact, a lot of the cities that we're going to talk to, I don't think I'd ever stepped foot into, small town Danville girl, until I was out there for memoryBlue.
I mean,
so you were moved to Boston. You didn't move your life there, but your work life to Boston, where you were put in charge of running that office.
Yeah. And I'll tell you, like, the hotel life isn't fun. The hardest part of stepping into Boston for me is the mental challenge that came along with it. Like, I lost, let's say in Virginia, I could go and have dinner with a friend on a Wednesday night. I could go to my favorite park and take a walk. I could go to, hang out with the people that had been around me. They were just like, I could go to the gym. That was my normal gym, like my habit that I would do. It's the habit that I built into my week every day after work. And all of a sudden, everything, these supports and these comfortable things that you've built into your life to, help you feel comfortable and safe were gone for me, in a sense, because it's like you're now traveling. I'm having to rebuild, as well as, I'm in a new office where I'm learning new things and having to learn the people, the culture of, the offices is a huge thing for me when I first step in. And so it was really mentally tough stepping in there, knowing that, like, I had lost all of my habits and things that I had set up in my life to make me successful. And I had to rebuild them in a traveling aspect, which it took me a while, I will say, to really find kind of a structure and a schedule with it.
I know Chris is on a good run. I remember, we have a great business. It's a challenging business, right? We allow the clients to hire the SDRs. We allow the clients to leave with relative ease, but that's part of the operating model. And with that comes, there's a sea of change. And I've been in some of the offices that we've been working on, and I'm like, man, this is going to be a tall order, right? Because it's not an easy thing to get in and implement change and make things better. So what after doing that, I mean, I know you did it in Virginia, but certainly Boston is significantly different. What was like the main thing you learned from, the turnaround, right? The turnaround perspective, or turnaround, like the one or two things that you think you took into the next spot, and so on and so forth. Because unlike a lot of things in the business, like, you're doing things that no one else in the company has ever done before, like Chris and myself included. Right? We've started things from scratch and built things up and opened offices, although we were never in a remote office by ourselves. I mean, I personally have a lot of respect and admiration for MDs that do that too. But what are some of, like, the big lessons in terms of changing culture and changing performance that you've learned?
Yeah, Marc, you kind of have it there. Like, culture is the key for me. And so the way that I've looked at this, I think a lot of companies, even like outside of memoryBlue, they look at culture as like this thing that you layer on top of a company that makes people happy, want to show up to work. It's an added benefit of the role, outside of money and learning and growing and experiences. But for me, culture is the core of who we are for me. And so, like, stepping into an office, I want to know that there's energy on the floor. Like, no one wants that stale feeling when they're stepping in anywhere. And so for me, that's the very first thing that I look to address is, how do I create this energetic, collaborative, like, you just see people flowing and moving and communicating and grouping and ungrouping. Like, it's almost like an orchestra for me when you walk in. Like, I want to see all of the instruments moving with each other and playing, not just one, sad song necessarily. And so that's really where I start is, if that's not fixed at its core, then everything else that I try to layer on top of it, it's just, I'm never going to get it to be as successful as what it could be.
That's a great point. It is like a symphony in motion, and you distracted me. She distracted me, Chris, with that, with the
not hard.
I know that's what Kelsie and I. That's our superpowers, though. It allows you to focus on multiple things and be super curious. Although we can't find our wallet from time to time.
Kelsie. So having gone through this, building something from scratch versus doing turnarounds, which one is more difficult and why?
That's a good question. I would definitely argue turnarounds. I've always been someone that I think you can teach an old dog new tricks, but it's really freaking hard to do that. That's not an easy thing. So I think for me, we all get in our habits and ways of doing things, and those are just naturally hard to change. Now, we as people do them, but also as companies and as offices, like we build our own habits and ways that we do things and we approach things, and it just becomes the norm. And especially for a company like us, where we have these amazing SDRs getting hired out, moving on to their next role, these new people are coming in and they're seeing these old habits and they're picking them up. And we have so much that's like coming in and out because of the SDRs getting hired out and rising stars, that you got to be able to change that at some point in time and not allow those new people to pick up some of the old habits that you don't want to carry into the future with you. And so for me, it's like, you got to focus on those old habits and changing and fixing. So the new group of people that are coming in and they're fresh and they're ready and they're getting after it.
So when you're doing a turnaround, it sounds like the culture is the centerpiece for you. How do you go about that? Do you find one or two or three people that are bought into that and kind of just shine the light on them and build around them? Or what's your approach? Like, what do you do? How do you do it?
So I have a two-pronged approach. The first one is I actually directly get in at the SDR level. I do have a couple of people that I think are usually my core people that I like to start with and kind of help me grow that. But it is so important for me to have a relationship with every single SDR on the floor. I want to know them. I want to know, how they operate, how they think. I think, over time I've gotten to learn how people are. That way, when their delivery manager comes to me, I have a general feel on how they approach things based off of me getting to know them. It's like, well, that person, they really appreciate, you being direct and open and honest with them about things. Like, I think you need a more direct approach with this person. And it's allowing me to coach my managers to coach their people better. So I want to know my people. That's the first thing. The second piece, which I kind of alluded to, is part of culture for me, in a way that I define it, is the support level that you're providing the people on your team. Like, if you're going to hold them to a certain standard, your support level has to also be sitting at the same level as, the standard that you were holding them to. And so I think a lot of our delivery managers do a good job of that, but it's how can I empower them to be even better coaches, support their people even better. So I know the people in the office, and then I push our managers to raise the bar in terms of the way that they're supporting their teams. And then I pair all that together with our delivery managers are extremely busy people. What's the best return on your time? And I go from there kind of forward of like, what areas can we lock in and focus on?
So, you've done, you started in Virginia, you've gone to Boston, you've gone to Seattle, you've gone to San Jose, you're in Austin. When you see things that aren't, or how do you know when there needs to be a culture change? Like what when you walk in, like what do you look for? What do you identify? How do you know if the culture is really strong or it's weak? Like what are the signs, the signals?
Yeah, it's a great question. For me, I think part of it is like I just recognize kind of the energy within an office, but some of the key things I look for, like in the middle of the day, are SDRs talking about their personal lives? Are they talking about what just happened on the phone and email or LinkedIn, or is it a good mix of both? So for me, I'm listening for those key indicators of how are SDRs talking about, like, what are they talking about during their day to day? Because I want them to be excited about the email they just sent or the LinkedIn that they're getting out or hearing someone else's opinion. That means they trust their peers' opinions as well. And so that's one of the key indicators for me. The second one is delivery managers. We talk about our blitz times and they're so sacred to us, and they truly are. Like, I want to see the managers out on the floor working, giving feedback, advice. Like, the more I see people communicating, whether it's at the SDR level or the delivery manager, just throughout the small parts of the day, it's really indicative of where a company's culture is currently sitting, as well as just, you look at the smiles. Are people smiling? Are they interacting? Are they up and moving around? Are they standing during blitz because they have that energy? Or is there like a drained feeling over some of the SDRs, maybe one team, a couple people here and there? Like, they're just some smaller things that you start to pick up on.
Great. So let's say you walk into an office and it's very low energy during blitz. How do you turn that around?
That actually comes back to the delivery manager supporting them. So for me, it's like, I think there's one thing between a manager who is like, hey, you need to be more persistent on this call, or you need to be more, confident as you're showing up on this call. Well, the way that I describe it to my managers, I'm like, look, that's like telling someone who has anxiety, like, be less anxious. Most people are going to be like, if I could, I would I appreciate
Right.
that, but like, it's not that simple. And so I think a lot of these our SDRs are relatively, newer to the sales world. And so it's like, yeah, maybe they do want to be more persistent, but you need to provide them with the actual pieces, kind of, Chris, like what you just asked me, like, what are the things that makes someone persistent? And like, what are those actual like tactical skills that they can implement? I'm like, it's going to be having strong language. It's going to be prepping them with questions to drive the conversation forward. We love our a la carte here, like having that a la carte that's ready to go that you can push forward in the conversation with. And so I look at my managers too. You need to prep them with a little bit more material here in order to be successful. And outside of that, I want you to be present and be on the floor and show them that you are willing to get in the trenches with them. If they're in the trenches, you're in there too. And you guys are going to push through together. Like, you're on the battlefield with them.
I have a question, if I can interrupt the flow. You mentioned it earlier, but I wanted to kind of revisit it, was how you look at data in Salesforce, right? The beautiful thing about our business is we do everything out of a CRM tool. A lot of our competition does it. We know that firsthand experience. And we have lots of amazing data. I've seen you too break down reports, and you mentioned it earlier how DMs are coming to you, but just how important is data and looking at the data as one piece of it in terms of helping an SDR or a team be successful?
Yeah, I mean, it's that part too of like, I'm getting to know the SDRs, but at the same time, the data is the most critical piece for me. I know exactly where we need to focus, what we need to focus in on, and where we need to start with each person. And so for my managers, like, there are a lot of moving pieces in the delivery manager role, in the managing director role. And I think they know, sometimes maybe they know this data exists, they know they can find it. But for me, I want to make it easy to read. I've built a ton of dashboards over time. Like, I want this data to be extremely accessible for our delivery managers to understand. And so I do start from a data first perspective. And what we've learned a lot of times, I've heard managers who are like, oh, they need more help with their objection handling, their closing. And we come back and look at it. And I'm like, no, they're actually struggling with their initial objection handle, like the objection they get right after their opening statement, and like 80% of their calls. Well, what if we could cut that out in 80% of their calls and get them having longer conversations, driving more leads for their client? Like, let's start there. So, the delivery managers can be in tune, but this right here, it's like, okay, well, that's based off of the four calls that your SDR, came and broke down with you this past week. They were focused on the closing side of things, but I want us to look at what is the biggest obstacle holding us back. And we're going to need to look at the data for that. You can't just rely on SDRs who are still learning the role and learning how to read their data. And, sometimes we black out in our cold calls, if you will. Like, I remember my first CWIP, I don't even remember the conversation at all. Like, it was just, a black tunnel until I got to the end of it. And I still think that's true for a lot of SDRs. Like, we don't remember every conversation perfectly. And there's a lot that's going on in our brain during a conversation with a prospect, or a CWIP here, as we call it. And so this data is helping us kind of remove ourselves from that bias.
Yeah, it's easy to tell someone just to be more persistent, be more demonstrative. It's a lot harder to actually change the way they think and act. And the data is key. And I've seen you kind of break that down with people. It makes people into believers because it's hard for people to argue with the data.
It is.
Right? Especially when you know it so well.
And it's empowering for a lot of people too. It's hard to argue, but they feel so much more empowered because in that point in time, I think what a lot of people love the feeling of control, having control over something. And in that moment, when you have this piece of data in front of you that's helping you understand yourself, you now have an aspect of control over not necessarily the problem, but the thing that you want to fix or get better at. Like, it's step number one. You have the baseline for where you can go from here. And I think that's really reassuring to a lot of people to help them take that next step and really push themselves in the right direction.
That's a great point, because you can't control how the prospect, the mood they're in, or how they're going to handle your OS or even the call, but you can kind of control the numbers around getting them more of those. Yeah, you can control the numbers. There's no doubt about that.
So Kelsie, we talked a little bit about building something from scratch versus turning around a team or an office. Talk to us a little bit about, once you've got things turned around, whether it be partially or fully, how do you hand that off to someone else?
I think that may actually be one of the hardest parts of the role. Everyone manages things in different ways. And so everyone has their different superpowers and their strengths. And so what worked for me and my superpower might not be someone else's. And so as I'm setting these offices up for even more success and I'm about to hand it off to someone, like the first thing that goes through my mind is like, how sustainable are the changes that I'm making? I think some leaders within companies will look at these changes they make and they're like, okay, like we're going to do this. It works. It's my strength. We're going to run with it. But for me, yes, I know it's my strength, but can the person behind me do it? Because if I made all these changes and I did all these great things, it's not worth anything if we can't continue it in any way. And so my biggest thing is like, I want to make sure that I'm prepping the people that are going to be coming in behind me with the data. I want to make sure that I'm prepping them with like, what's the biggest return on investment in your time and what you're putting your time and energy into? Because I think that's something that as you're stepping into a new role, it's just, you kind of have to learn it naturally, but the more that I can help prep the next person into, how to approach those things, the more that I want to do that. And so really it starts with the minute I walk in the door. Can these changes be sustainable, whether or not it's me in the role or the person behind me? And so that's where I really focus a lot on process. I focus a lot on structure. And a lot of what I do is actually focused on coming back to the basics, because the basics can be continued. They can be, you can layer on your secret sauce and your special sauce like on top of that. But if we've got the basics down, that's going to keep us moving in the right direction.
It's not AI.
I will say I use a lot of AI in my job.
Okay.
It probably comes out of my mouth once a day being like, oh, you should learn ChatGPT or see what ChatGPT says.
Tell us a little bit about that, because that's a little bit more of the future. And I like to scoff at social selling and AI from time to time because we're like a hardcore fundamentals. But like this gives it even more credibility. Like talk a little, just we'll meander down this path a little bit before you start to wrap up. But what do you mean by AI?
There's a lot of different ways that I use AI. And I think the biggest thing that I use it for is actually in understanding the industries, the markets, the space of our clients. So we have a lot of clients that come to memoryBlue. So we serve a range of clients, as you guys know, all the way from startups up to some of the bigger names here. And what we do, there are a lot of these companies that we work with don't have a sales function necessarily in-house outside of maybe a few AEs, or they're just getting it stood up. They're starting to just understand their market, their ICP, what that looks like. And so when we ask for like, hey, in the very beginning, some messaging from our clients to get started off, it can be pretty vague from some of our clients. We get hit with nothing against marketing here, but some marketing heavy buzzwords. And I'm like, that's not going to play out on the phone. Like I can't tell them we're going to optimize their data in an all-in-one solution that's going to give them insights into everything they've ever needed. That means nothing to them. Like we got to get more specific than that. And so when we have, clients who we're working alongside to, build out the messaging for what we want to say, one, we're not only leveraging what we have internally, what we've known to work, but again, it's an art. Like there's still so much more to learn. So like what I do with our newer clients, like I want to learn the space in the industry. And I think ChatGPT is actually, or really AI in general, is one of the fastest ways to get to understand a market and, what people care about. You can ask it so many questions. Like, tell me about what people care about in relation to this, insert like, let's say cybersecurity. It's a really broad topic, but there's just so much information that you can start to ingest, whether it's at the SDR level, the delivery manager level, or even some managing director. I have a lot of clients that I'm working with, and I have to be able to get in tune with them really fast. I may not be on every single, client kickoff that we have, although I do my best. I still have to be able to get up to speed on some of these clients to be able to help my delivery managers kind of on that background strategic work that we're doing. So in terms of that, also, I love it for a good email. Like if I'm busy, I actually might throw in like, hey, just had a conversation about this. Can you help me type up an email? That would be a perfect fit for what I want to say here. Go in, make some edits, and I get that out like that. Learning to be efficient with your day is extremely important, especially as you continue to move up throughout your career.
It's a great use of how it can actually be applicable to the role. Chris and I have been talking to a lot of memoryBlue high achievers lately, internal and external. And one of the common themes I'm hearing is you build this high performing team and you have SDRs who come to the office and they say it without even being asked. They don't want to walk out of the office that day without having something on the board.
Yeah.
Right. And that when you're doing a job as difficult as ours, and I've seen you develop teams to this level, when you've got people in the team who are like, man, I don't want to leave because I don't have anything on the board and my colleagues do. I mean, that says something about it. Is that something that you think is important?
I mean, incredibly important. And I think, like, to your point, like, I think it's the true testament of, someone's developing where they're at and the strength of not only the SDR, but the team in the office that they sit within, even at memoryBlue here. That's the ultimate goal for me.
And I got one more topic, and then we'll wrap up. Talk to me a little bit about, I mean, it's a necessary part of the offense, the performance management, right? Because we want to care and develop people. We also need to know when to help people find what's best for them. And sometimes it might not be working here as an SDR, but also you want to keep the culture high performing. You want to hold people accountable. Like what's your take in your experience? Because you've got a very unique experience set on performance management.
Definitely. So like many companies, we are not perfect when it comes to interviewing. We do our best. We actually have a really great interviewing process, if you will. Like, we have multiple touches with our candidates, but we miss every once in a while. I will say performance management has been a crucial part of a lot of the work that I've done, mostly because, yes, we want to help people grow. Not only does it, help the people that are put on a plan, but our delivery managers get even stronger with their coaching as well throughout the process. And you have to understand how people operate, how people work. And in order to write a plan that's going to be good and is really going to fit this person and help them elevate themselves to the level that we're hoping to see them elevate to, like, delivery managers, like, we have to step up our game here. So not only is it elevating them, but in terms of the people, like, sales isn't for everyone, and that's okay. I have always been in the thing, like, some people who truly have not worked out with the company, like, we don't want them to sit in a role and be miserable and not like being, in this role because cold calling maybe isn't something that they're interested in. Like, it's better for both of us if you go find the thing that's going to, spark your fire inside of you that you're going to enjoy and be good at. And that's so important for everyone who's, I've found that for me, it's coaching and development. I want to see other people find that as well. And I mean, sometimes it just doesn't exist with the memoryBlue, but I will say, for a lot of people, it does. It's a great starting place. And so it's tough to performance manage people. Like, I don't think there are many people out there throughout the industry that are going to say they necessarily, fully enjoy it or think it's an easy thing. Like, it's just a tough reality for a lot of people and managers within sales, but there is an art of being good at it. I think one of the great things about memoryBlue is we've gotten really good about getting people off of their performance plans. I have some managers like with the data, we're using the data to drive the performance, to show where, if we only have a short amount of time to get this person performing and turning them around, you've got to go straight to that data and get them turned around, based off of what is affecting them the most.
Yes. Try and take the emotion out of it if you can, in a positive way.
Exactly.
Just kind of as we close things out for now, I'm sure we'll do another one of these with you as we progress. If it was, the night before you started at memoryBlue, knowing what you know now, what advice would you have for that person, yourself, and or other folks who it's their first night before memoryBlue, day one?
Yeah, I would say if I could go back in time, the night before, I would say, gosh, there's not much that I would change. I probably would say be a sponge. I know that's probably a very, generic, straightforward answer, but it really is. Like, in a sponge, not just in memoryBlue, but like I mentioned, like those 1% better everyday things like podcasts and books. Like, push yourself to ingest all of the material you can, as much as you can, in whatever ways that you can. But for me, like, I've said yes to the doors that have been opened for me because of all of those learnings and things. Like, I never thought I'd be sitting in Texas, or I would have visited or lived in Seattle for months, or Boston. Like, I'm a completely different person. If you would have asked me 5 years ago if I would be sitting as a managing director in Austin, Texas, I probably would have laughed in your face, being like, I mean, could I do it? Yes, but like, that's crazy to me. And here I am.
Wild. It's amazing. We're blessed to have you work here. What's your favorite city? This is outside of the memoryBlue business thing. What's your favorite city so
I've
far?
only been in Austin for 24 hours, but Seattle, hands down. It's gorgeous. There's so much to do. There's water. Oh, I absolutely loved it. I did get to spend the most time there living wise, so that might be, but I love Seattle, the nature, just everything there is to do. Really, really cool place to be.
All right. We'll have to see what you think about Austin.
Talk to her in 90 days.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yep.
I have a feeling it could change.
All right, Kelsie. Well, thank you for your insight and your time and your commitment to the cause and the people who work for you and your clients.
Of course. Thank
Great
you guys
work,
for having me
Kelsie.
on. Appreciate it.
That was amazing.
Thanks for listening to Tech Sales is for Hustlers. Please subscribe and leave a 5-star review after the beep.